Hello. Welcome to the Xirtus.
Synctank.
The mouse Baphomet connection might have ended there for me had I not thought about the chocolate mousse in the film Rosemary's Baby, used by the satanic cult in the film as a vector to surreptitiously intoxicate Rosemary with something to make her sleep while she's being raped by Satan in a ritual. The mousse is made by Rosemary's neighbor, Minnie Castevet, who, along with her husband Roman Castevet, acts on behalf of the cult as Rosemary's handler, initiating Rosemary's husband Guy into the cult and manipulating Rosemary into unwittingly being impregnated with the Antichrist. The mousse is delivered to Rosemary and Guy by Minnie as a gift while they are having a romantic dinner at home. Rosemary, who can taste the contaminant in the dessert, complains of a, quote, undertaste, and sneakily dumps the remainder of her mousse in her napkin when Guy isn't looking. The connection between this scene and not only the mouse, Baphomet symbolism, but specifically Mickey Mouse, is underscored by the fact that the character's name, Minnie, is the same as that of Mickey Mouse's wife, and that Minnie specifically pronounces the word moose as mouse. With her overly rouged cheeks, occasionally sporting a black and white polka dot do-rag tied into a bow on the top of her head, Mrs. Castevet even resembles Minnie Mouse. During the sex ritual, Guy expresses concern that
you might want to be careful.
In consciousness, but
Too
Minnie...
late. Yeah, you might want to be careful.
Too late.
All right, I'm sorry. We'll see how we rolled the dice a little far there.
Yeah, no, it's on BitChute. It's not on YouTube, I don't believe. So and Oddity or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? Who does have a video about Mickey like slipping a Mickey and how Mickey Mouse has to do with date rape drugs?
Yeah.
Xirtus. That's right. That's right.
Really...
We have a video about that. So
well, it did. The term Mickey to slip somebody a Mickey did come like a ways before Mickey Mouse, and so
but they're related because it was apparently Mickey was the name of this guy who ran the Chicago bar that this was happening, and apparently Walt Disney did name. I mean, there's a huge connection between Mickey Mouse and slipping a Mickey, and that Mickey might be named after what's the name of the guy? Mickey slipping Mickey. Chicago bar. I have this whole thing somewhere. Mickey Finn, right? Mickey Finn is the Chicago bartender who infamously drugged and robbed patrons laced with drinks, right? Slipping a Mickey. So it's definitely early 1900s Chicago, but the kind of thing that Walt Disney would know about. Anyway, welcome to Synctank. We were talking about Tracy because everybody loves Tracy. It was like a whole other, this could have been an episode title in and of itself. Everybody loves Tracy Twyman. Although I like the title Tracy Twyman, Not Without My Blotter, because that almost works just as well. But we're talking about Tracy Twyman today a little bit because Tracy was a really interesting synchro mystic who wrote like 6 books, and
she wrote more than that.
Yeah, she did a lot of stuff, and really interesting sync work, like pretty good. Like see the. You know, they're like, that's odd. Oh, Tracy Twyman's wearing a Freemason symbol. What the world? Tracy died in July of 2019. So suicide is the official story, and I think a lot of people argued about that. However, we've had Christopher Knowles on the show, who was good friends with Tracy, and he basically agreed. He's like, yeah, I knew her, and this makes perfect sense that she committed suicide. Like, if you know about how much burden it was to have this kind of thought process, and this is before COVID, like how hard it was for people to wrestle with all of these weird syncs and their own interpretation of the scenarios. Or was COVID really something else? I mean, of course, a synchromistic was going to think that. So there's just so much to the Tracy story. But yeah, I just wanted to bring her up. And I know that, Thomas, you were reading, this has come up in the group this week, you were reading one of her books or several of her books,
I'm so late to the game between pretty much anyone that's ever been on this show. I feel like with Twyman, I know that there was so many things that clicked. There were so many different tangents that we've been on. And it's like, oh, this is what they were talking about a year and a half ago in that conversation, that I was kind of like chuckling and pretending I knew what the thread was. But now I kind of get it. But so I was stuck on an airplane for cumulative 20 hours. So I read through all of Genuflect, which was the very first Tracy book I ever read. And it was so different from anything I was expecting. And I guess I was kind of going in a little bit blind that I saw it. It was sort of like Synctank meets Harry Potter in a way. That was what I walked away with Genuflect. But so many people have described her work to me as if it were going to be some kind of reference book, or like a very literal, here's some research, when I kind of found myself getting into a fictional novel at some way, right? So when I started reading Mini Moose, it was a little bit of that same feeling. I'm just curious from you guys, how much of it is Harry Potter and how much of it is like real research? And I hate to use the word real there, but how would you?
What do you mean by Harry Potter? You mean in terms of her relationship to occultism? It's
in Genuflect, it felt like it was fictionalized in a really interesting way, in which the research could be presented as a story, but it felt just as much as a fictional novel as Harry Potter did.
Well, just so you know, Tracy, it used to be, I don't know what it is now, but while she was around, if you went onto Wikipedia and just looked up Baphomet, almost everything came from her. She was considered the authority on everything related to Baphomet. And so she wrote on that, but she's very empirical. She was so prolific. If you're looking at Minnie's Mouse or whatever, that book was never officially published until after she passed. And so the way that book is presented, you said in a message that it felt more like a PowerPoint presentation, that was what she used as the basis for the set of films she was working on, that film series. But there was supposed to be another chapter to that, and so she died while she was working on it. It's a little misleading, when people are saying that she was just looking at Hollywood pedo stuff. Yes, she was, but she was very focused on a specific summer camp at the time of her death that was run by really ridiculously rich people. And I don't know, it's kind of strange to share this online, but in this format, but I'll just go ahead if you don't mind.
Go.
So there was a video that she had given to at least two people she was close with that said, if anything happens to me, I want you to release this. Out of respect for her family, as far as I know, it was never uploaded for the public, but a copy of it was given to me at the time, very shortly after her death. And I watched the whole thing, and basically it was her showing how the people who ran this summer camp were basically torturing her. So I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to have my shit hacked or whatever, and if she recommended to people not to look this up. So she was don't follow this thread because it leads to a really bad place. And so they were threatening her life. They had hacked her computer and were sending her messages that she was able to prove of what they were doing. They were playing back things from her camera on her computer from her own personal life that she didn't know that they had access to. So they were showing off their own capabilities of whatever people they probably had working for them to do this kind of techie stuff that a lot of people probably weren't conspiracy minded enough to really think that some of it's even possible, but they were monitoring her whole life. And so I do think that Tracy killed herself at this point, but I think she was driven to it by these people, and so it's really scary.
Here's a funny quote. So Eddie posted this at some point ever, I guess January of this year. Sex Slaves in the CIA is a collection of essays and interviews about Project Monarch, compiled and edited by Tracy Twyman. And then this quote from Tracy: "Isn't it logical that if our parents were Satanists or occultists, they might subject us to similar indoctrination? And since satanic and occult practices purportedly bestow worldly powers upon their practitioners, isn't it logical that some of our most powerful leaders might participate in such practices? Isn't it logical that they would make use of occult-based mind control techniques such as hypnotism, rituals, mind-altering drugs, and neurolinguistic programming, i.e., rote memorization of magic words, techniques that have been traditionally component of religious ceremonies, from the mystical priesthoods of Babylon, Greece, Rome, and Egypt to the cults of today?" I mean, it seems logical.
Well, so I want to revisit the context of Genuflect, right? Are both of you guys familiar with Genuflect?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay, so Genuflect might be an outlier in some ways, because it was written as if she was being hired to be a lecturer, like a private lecturer for someone that was researching kind of like a homunculus, to put it lightly. And she gets there and she gets kidnapped by 2 MI6 agents, and then they bring her into this small town, or like a little like miniature town empire into itself. And then within there's this huge skyscraper building, and the skyscraper building is hooked up to all the urinals and all the toilets and everything, so that anyone that goes in and out of this building, they're harvesting their urine and their feces and any other bodily fluid you can imagine. And it's just constantly refining. And there's people that have to go through this, and there's people of all classes, especially higher class. But so essentially, spoiler alert in a way, although it's hard to spoil, like 500 pages of Twyman writing in a few seconds. But
sure,
at the very end, we know that there's this kind of like head honcho of the Illuminati, the guy that sits in the middle chair, the baddest chair of all of them, and he kind of like hits a button, so to speak, and all of these different fluids that are being harvested and have this energy and stuff, they turn into this crazy monstrous amalgamation that puts forth like a white baby and a black baby, and it's got all this, tarot style symbolism, but it's all happening as if it turns into that movie Society in a way at the very end. And just like the movie Society, it's like, well, did the person putting that out think that a bunch of elites literally get in a room and fuse their naked bodies together into one amorphous, like, sexual blob of wrinkles and nose hair or whatever, right? Like, it's not that literal. So as I was going through Genuflect, I was like, how much of that, like, where's the exact line? Was she actually invited? Have she ever actually been kidnapped by an MI6 agent that told her as such? Has she actually ever had her feet severed and then reattached using alchemical means? Like, I would love to know, but part of what made it such an engaging read is that I couldn't pinpoint where that exact spot on the spectrum was, and she like jumps in and out of it so like fluent, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that Tracy had an outstanding sense of humor too. And so, like, shortly before she passed, she had made a video with a friend of hers where they were doing a Ouija board seance to Prince. So like Prince had died and she was like contacting Prince, but they're like laughing but also kind of serious at the same time. At a certain point, it was like, we're not talking to Prince, are we? Like, this was some other entity that they were communicating with, and then they were tripping out on it. But they're also like having a good time at the same time. Like, it wasn't like, so she had a perspective and she had a sense of humor, I guess is my only point. So take certain things from her with a grain of salt, I guess you should say. I can say
it's a fair point. I mean, I can't really. I was just introduced to her work less than like a week ago, or maybe like a week total. After I've gone through and I've read just Genuflect and just like the first 2/3 of Minnie Mouse, or Minnie's Moose or whatever. So I'm still figuring out, like, is she a Robert Anton Wilson or a Burroughs in a way where she has this insider info but's putting out in a slightly different way? Is she almost like a Hunter S. Thompson of like the occult world.
The gonzo of occult.
I guess
Little
those
bit.
are legitimate questions, because this is what's going through my mind as I'm introduced to this work. And on top of that, I've been doing a series called Occult Disney for well over a year, going on 2 years now. And I feel like I have to go back to square one, and I got to redo every episode of Occult Disney now with Twyman in my brain.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking at minis, moose, mouse, whatever, you want to look at, like you are, I think, is you want to look at the PDF and the film series, because the film series has things that aren't in the PDF, and the PDF has things that aren't in the film series. So, and some of it has just been like huge for me.
Right. Well, what we were watching is Andreas courageously threw up some of the video at the beginning.
Yeah.
She mentions the polka dotted bow in the hair. That was not in the presentation. And as soon as I heard her say that, I was like, damn, it really does add an extra level where there is, I guess, in a critical sort of way, there is this flow, even in that quote that Andreas brought up, where she'll make like 4 like theories. She'll kind of like put forward 4 ideas, and she'll usually be like, well, if you agree with A, then probably B, and if you agree with B, then probably C, and then therefore D. And I find, as I'm reading Minis Moose, as I'm reading Genuflect, I'm finding when she does that and she goes through, like, sometimes it'll stack up to like a 13 combo, right? And it's like, but wait a minute, I had a question at C, and like before you E to E to F to G, like all the way to Z, right? Like I still am not sure. I'm flaky on like the second or third step there, and that like was going. But anyways, the point being that like polka dotted bow, it's like that was one of those C's. It's like, okay, now I get D and E, but now I got a question about F. And unfortunately, if this is one of her unfinished works, we don't get to say like, wait, I had a question about Z3 or something, right? Like when she gets so deep into this thread.
Well, did you get into all the Frank Sinatra stuff yet?
I did, yeah. I think I'm at the tail end of that. Like, for example, one of the things that I'm sure I've heard before and it just didn't register that was blowing my mind, thanks to Twyman's research, was that Angela Lansbury's daughter was in the Manson cult, and she was in particular the person that allegedly left, but said, hey, they're doing some weird PDF file stuff in this group, and that specific claim has been used as like the closest that they have as proof of Manson getting into those areas. And like, I wasn't really even sure where that quote had come from, of all people, Angela Lansbury. And then Twyman's like, oh, and by the way, Angela Lansbury was the handler in Manchurian Candidate, starring Frank Sinatra. And now here's like a week's worth of, research to digest on just Sinatra's connection to the mob in Hollywood. And it was blowing my mind.
Totally. Yeah, she was my go-to contact for portions of when I was doing Sorry Cassandra, I Misunderstood Everything Predicts 9/11, because while I was working on that, I came across a video of like Masonic handshake stuff, because I was like, I wanted a visual representation of Masonic handshakes, and the only thing I could find, I found, I think, on YouTube. And I was like, I looked at it and I was like, wait, this is Tracy Twyman. And I was like, I'm friends with Tracy Twyman on freaking Facebook. So I sent Tracy Twyman my first private message to her. I was like, hey, apparently this is your video. And I was like, good job. And she was like, yeah, I did that in college. And then I just started, like, whenever I had a question about something occult related for a while, I'd just send her a private message, and she just turned me on to all these really cool, crazy things that to this day were really impactful. Like The Smallest Show on Earth, also titled Big Operators, which was a really weird, obscure, older film with Peter Sellers about a theater that she's basically pointing out the way that, like, there's stuff in this movie that relates to a lot of things with Kubrick. And so it was a source of inspiration for different places throughout his film career. Like, there's strong arguments for it. She also turned me on to a episode of, I think we've talked about it before, but Laurel and Hardy, the Sons of the Desert episode about the secret fraternity that was kind of like the Rotary Club or Lions or Freemasonry or whatever you want it to be. But yeah, so like both of these, she's like, you have to watch these. And so like I watched them, and yeah, they're, like I say, they were super impactful. But she was like a really great, amazing resource when it came to anything occultism related with like occult pop culture stuff. So yeah, anyway.
It makes me feel like 20 years behind. Like I gotta like rewatch all the media I've ever consumed now with an extra filter on, and it's a little bit overwhelming to even realize that, you know, I've missed this like fundamental instruction from like early on.
Right. So like her minis moose thing combined with Sinister Forces is like huge. Like there's
Right, well,
like
she cites it quite often. I have read Sinister Forces, and I'd say Sinister Forces was equally like shaping for me. Like I reached out to Peter Levenda, but like never really got a response. Went like early on, like early 2000s, I think.
he's accessible. I sent him the 1976 Bluebird with ELO's El Dorado, and he liked it. You know, like he's somebody who I'd love to get on this show. Like I think he would be down. I mean, we should see about it.
Yeah.
But yeah. He's very open minded. You know,
That
like,
was my first introduction to this particular thread of political witchcraft and Hollywood all being this thing, like harnessing this energy. Like almost you combine those forces into some weird egregore that has no other name, and that everyone's kind of describing it in different ways. Like Tracy Twyman and Peter Levenda are these two Chinese dudes in the room describing the elephant in a way, right?
right. We're
Yeah, I mean, so to me, it's interesting to see, like, because I was following her work years ago, how it changed, particularly how we were changing, how the world was changing from 2012 to 2019, because her early work is kind of deep, but not in a way that's going to get her hurt necessarily, because it's so specific, and we're more and more, I think it's more and more zeitgeist now, but at the time, people weren't talking about Charles Manson, even though he was alive still. People weren't talking about the Tate murders or anything like that. It wasn't like wasn't in vogue to bring this up and to look into Rosemary's Baby. Like there was a small group of people. The thing is, really, the Sync book people were the audience that she was looking, like the participatory audience that she was looking for.
Well, and they might have been groomed in a way, because in retrospect, I feel like you two have groomed me to be, you know, like receiving of Tracy Twyman's work in a way that
I just groomed the Scottish Rite. I feel pretty good about myself.
I've come across that work, and I want to be honest that if I hadn't read Genuflect first, I probably would have gotten about a third of the way through Minnie Mouse and been like, "I'll bookmark this for later." Like I get it, but this is just too much for me right now. Like I feel like there's no basis, but it really, like, I got eased into it. I would almost, David, I would love to get your thoughts on it. So you haven't read Genuflect. I'm almost thinking of Genuflect as a way that Marilyn Manson described his smells. What the hell was his
Smells Like Children?
The way that he was describing his Eurythmics remix. What the hell?
Smells Like Children, yeah.
Yeah, so that song was kind of like the foot in the door, so that the parents would let the kids buy the thing, because it's like, oh, what is that? Like I remember that too when I was growing up. Yeah, you want the album, whatever, get that album, and then they go on and listen to the other songs on the album, and they go through the rest of the catalog.
What's funny about that? Yeah,
and I kind of feel that's Genuflect. Like Genuflect is like her Smells Like Children in a way. To me, it was right.
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
it's a pretty. Eddie loved it too. You know, it's one of his favorites.
Well, you know, just speaking to Smells Like Children, like when the record label, they wanted to have the single be I Put a Spell on You, and I think he wanted it to be the Eurythmics song, and so there was a dispute over that, and he was like, why do you think that I Put a Spell on You is like less dark? Because that was their explanation, and it was like it got twisted somehow. But I'm convinced now that whole album relates to Behind the Green Door. That's a crazy solid sync. And then what I got from Twyman was the direct connection between Marilyn Manson's Golden Age of Grotesque and what is it called, Salo, the 100
days or whatever, 100 days
of Sodom. Like that is an insanely solid synchronicity.
120 days. I was like,
120. Thank you. It's
somewhere in there, yeah.
But I cannot. I like put that together. Like I at her like communication around how the two were resonant, and like it's crazy solid. But I cannot bring myself to upload that anywhere. I don't want to upload that even in Dropbox. Like I'm just like, oh no, that's too much, man.
Well,
like
Genuflect to me is like what do you call it? Like Da Vinci Code. It's kind of it's
that was
really
my original analogy. Was Da Vinci Code meets Harry Potter, maybe meets Society.
Okay.
something.
Yeah, I see it more like Da Vinci Code than Harry Potter. However, I see where you're going, especially in Genuflect, because it's like Pamela is her. It's like this journalist lady who goes to England. I mean, it's not necessarily, but and it's like they go through this learning that first Pamela's character finds out that there's a secret society of Knights Templar in Britain, which is exciting. Gets more interested in it, and then there's like further and further rings, like Dante's Inferno, towards the center of the truth. And then she finds out that like the goal is to become a god. It's Apotheosis. So I'm trying to remember the other book by God, what's his name? I'm sorry,
Dan Brown?
Dan
you're
Brown.
talking about Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Right. That was what I was thinking too, is that like Holy Blood, Holy Grail was not as approachable, but it's essentially the same thing as Da Vinci Code in a way, where he turns it into a story. And that was
Well, it was the inspiration clearly by Dan Brown. Like,
correct. But I guess the way that I think of things, maybe in an unhealthy way, where it's like there's demographics. So the type of person that stops at Da Vinci Code never gets to Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And likewise, there are some people that get into Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and that's like almost like a reference approach versus like
Did you read Lost Symbol? Dan Brown's Lost Symbol?
No, I've only read Da Vinci Code and Holy. I started with Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and then I had to like force myself to do Da Vinci Code.
I have a screwed up, like, I don't know if this is provable, but if you read Lost Symbol and you check out what it's talking about, to me, it seems like Dan Brown's read Tracy Twyman, and I don't think that that's too outside of the realm of possibility.
Really?
no,
I feel like
that's not
Genuflect
relevant at all. Yeah.
I think Genuflect is a major inspiration for Lost Symbol, and Lost Symbol they ended up making into a series with Eddie Izzard as the Freemason professor father, and there's like it's all about apotheosis, and like it starts out with a hand that's been cut off, and it's in the center of this George Washington mural in Washington D.C., but it leads them back to the British Knights Templar. So there's a lot to it. This idea of the apotheosis thing, as opposed to, I mean, and this came up the other day because I was with Noel talking about suras versus asuras, and the etymology of Asia comes from asuras, and the difference between the Persians and the Hindus. But this is like everyone has the same idea of devas, but deva and deva, like the Hindu Sanskrit word deva versus the Persian word deva, they both mean deities, but deva in Persian means a deity that you are not to worship. And in Hindu, it's like a deity that you must worship. So there's something there, plus this idea that these are primordial spirits before gods and they're titans. So it's the Greek Titan Promethean thing. And if it's that, then what we're saying is you're not supposed to worship them, or it's like, this is where we get to that argument of, do we worship our God that we're subservient to, or do we become gods, right?
I'm thinking about George Washington in that Baphomet, pose, like it's put them side by side. It's like, dude, like, and then the whole, like you're saying, how do you say it?
Apotheosis.
Apotheosis. Like there you go.
This is the apotheosis of George Washington, right? And it's this crazy, and this is the room in Lost Symbol.
Right?
Yeah, and so this is the you can see like Lady Liberty wearing a Phrygian cap, holding a fasces.
Right.
And it's two goddesses. I'm not sure which.
There's an angel trumpet right there too. Got to point that out. Some Datura reference.
Yeah, with the angel herself. So I mean, something there about the goddess Columbia or something. I mean, you got to go a little deeper if you want. The Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Rainbow, the promise that this will never happen again. He's standing on top of this promise of God that this is the last time that we need order out of chaos. And it's that, we've become our own God. This is the Masonic goal, is that everyone could be free to some extent or some sort of a God, right? But that comes, I mean, especially in Genuflect, it's like she's seeing more like, to become a God sounds cool. Well, now you have to witness all these atrocities, and the atrocities are part of this programming to desensitize you to humanity. So eventually you just see a pile of, dead bodies in a Holocaust. You don't think of it as like people anymore. You just think of it as a pile, right? This is the disassociation of dehumanization. And it's more and more. So to become a god, you have to no longer be human. I don't know. There's a lot to Genuflect.
No, I dig it. That's like the end of Heaven's Gate, the film, right? Like where the higher ups are like, they ride through the devastation of the battle, and there's just dead bodies everywhere, but they're all like nonchalant about it. Like they're just like, meh. you know.
Well, there's another crazy sync here that leads right in exactly what Andreas was saying that was also kind of like shaping me. So I read Genuflect on the way there, and then the only other book that I had that was like, you know, chunky enough until I asked you for Minnie Mouse was Leopold's Ghost, which I just hadn't got around to because it had just been like, I don't know if I'm ready for this, and I had like a long stretch. So I read Leopold's Ghost, and exactly what was kind of happening in Genuflect towards the end, where it's like, how can this one person be so depraved, and how can so many people allow this to happen? And then I read Leopold's Ghost, and it was like an answer to that very theoretical question, like, how could something at such a large scale that's so ugly and so horrific happen, and no one even knows about it, and it's still happening now and no one knows about it? And Leopold's Ghost just was like an exclamation point at the end of that question for me.
You know, Journey to the End of the Night. What's the name of that author? It's escaping me, but Journey to the End of the Night is just like, it's written by a Nazi, right? But like this
Ferdinand
book,
Bardamu. Right?
No. This is
Louis Ferdinand Celine. No?
Yes,
Okay.
that's it. So this book is comical. It's funny, but it's like, it's just kind of ridiculing the absurdity of war, and that we treat it like it's like this dignified thing. And his kind of like his communication around World War I is that there was nothing dignified about it, even from like the generals and all the way down, that it was just like a total fucking just display of insanity, and that people just feeling like there is no real laws. Like we treat it that like, oh well, you know, there's these rules that you follow in war, and it's just like, well, when it gets down to it, like I couldn't do it justice. But like, it's just, and this is a book that the reason why I read it back when I did was because I kept on seeing it referenced by people who I just have so much you know, interest in or even respect for. So like, you know,
one of those extreme examples is, for example, from the Leopold's Ghost story, was this principle that the generals were so afraid, or I guess the force republique or whatever, the public force that had been recruited in the Congo by not the country of Belgium, but just Leopold himself, like in secret, like this is his private account, this is his Proton account, and he's like handling all of this. And one of these things that trickles all the way down to boots on the ground, because he himself was never physically in that geographical area in his life, I believe. This all happened with him as like this puppeteer. And there was this fear that all these people in this faraway land that he didn't really have any direct control over could mutiny or could turn against like this chain of operations in some way that would just break the whole thing down. So what this equated to at the ground level was that every bullet that got given to a soldier of some kind had to either be returned, like, here's my magazine with the 20 bullets in it still, or if you were missing one bullet, you had to come back with one right hand of a human being that represented that you used that to shoot a person, and you didn't use it to hunt, and you didn't use it or like stash it in your shoe so that when I turn my back after I get it back from you, you don't use it on me. So that every single bullet. And what this ended up doing was that they would be out in the middle of the Congo, you know, like months behind schedule, and have to hunt for animals in order to just feed themselves. So they kill an animal, and then it's like, well, now I got to go find some poor villager and cut their hand off just so that I don't get killed for not having this bullet that I needed to buy that. And it's like this those are the rules, like that. Those are the real laws of war, not Geneva Convention. It's like these weird things that, and if you don't do it this way, you die. And that's how all those rules kind of get declared.
Right. Well, the Journey to the End of the Night is from, you know, a ways before the Geneva Convention. And it's like, but how much in like now you see things not just from the Geneva Convention, but you have like the Nuremberg Code and these places where you're like, wow, we learned our lesson, right? But then you see these places where they're just like sidestepping these things that were supposed to be put in place. So you can't really, like, you can have a law, but nothing stopping people individually from just like ignoring that law.
One of the most horrific parts of the Leopold's Ghost is at the end of it is they're making estimations on, okay, how many lives were actually affected. And there's an obvious equation there with like the Holocaust as an analogy, but much longer period, much larger landmass. But the eventual point that it goes on to kind of stress is that 8 to 10 million. If you have to put a number, it's about 8 to 10 million. And that's just if you look at the Congo that was being run by Belgium. If you look over at like what the Portuguese are doing, where Germany was doing, where like all these other countries were doing, and add those up, now you've got something that is so far beyond the scale. And the point was that you go to a museum right now in Belgium that has all of the artifacts that were collected, and there might be a little tiny picture somewhere in like a dark corner with like a mound of human hands or a mound of human heads or something. But everything else is just like, look at this basket, look at this spear. And you go outside and you see Leopold and the big sort of like homage to him and all these buildings that he used to funnel the money in for private reasons. They did their job. They're upholding his legacy, and there is no like Holocaust narrative necessarily about that. And I feel like I'm 30, like, yeah, where were you 30 years ago? That was cute when that book came out in like 2000.
Yeah, but like, I mean, so all of it is based, I mean, okay, so again with Dan Brown was about within the same year as her first Merovingian bloodline history. So there is something going back and forth to me about that. Like the deeper we're looking into this idea, is there a secret society? How ancient is this mystery school? Who's in it? How famous are they? And that was, I think, about 25 years ago is when that started becoming more like around the end of Y2K into the beginning of there's a secret society that runs all things. We went from Y2K to September 11th, and something in that transition, right? It was like, yeah, there are people that know about these things, and they work with these things.
Similar to Lavinda with Tracy is that she had such a broad perspective on all these different players and all these components. Whereas like when we're talking about like something like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, it's just very specific. Like there's this group of people, they have this influence, whatever, but she's getting big into like looking at the mob and all these different, rungs of society and what's going on. And so like the kicker with
MK Ultra
is so much like, yeah, we're talking about occultists and these secret societies and all this stuff, but then it ends up going to this place where it's just like, Catholics, like with Frank Sinatra, like that's like the kicker with that whole, like for me at least, like its eyes, what did you do to its eyes? Like that interpretation of like just
the Holy See, yeah.
Of blue eyes. So like I think we've discussed this, but it's totally like if we're talking about this, let's just talk about it, like because it's so important. So like and how Rosemary's Baby, the book from Era 11 or however you say his name, like how it differs in certain ways from the film, and what was going on behind the scenes with the film is that you had Mia Farrow was married to Frank Sinatra. She was with at the same time, right? So she filed, Frank Sinatra filed for divorce with Mia Farrow the day and year that the impregnation scene was shot. So like, there's the strong argument that was like, he was like, this is as far as you could go. Like he had another movie that he wanted her to be in that was kind of like, would have not done anything for her career.
The Detective.
And so, yeah, and so you also have to keep in mind, like, this is a bit of context. Like at the time, like this was a Holocaust survivor, like Polanski. Like say whatever you will, like about the guy, like just objectively, like in Hollywood at that time, comes over here from Poland and is like, directing this film with this woman who's like, she realizes she's pregnant in this movie about pregnancy, like having the devil's baby, while she's married to a Catholic who's connected with the mob and all these other Catholics. And he's like, you can't be in a movie where you're getting impregnated with the devil's baby. Like he is not okay with it. And so there's the argument that it's like, is it Woody Allen's baby? Or is it Frank Sinatra's that she's pregnant with? There's a scene in the movie where she was crying in real life, finding out that she was pregnant. Like, and they took advantage of the moment and like left it in the movie with her doing lines. Like it wasn't originally scripted that she was going to be crying in the scene, but they were like, let's just go for it. Like as this is happening, like she just got the news. It's like, like it's crazy. So, at the end, when she says its eyes, what did you do to its eyes? Tracy made the argument that could have been in reference to the way that they delivered that. Like that was like saying when the baby's born, you're going to know whose baby it is. If it's Woody Allen's or Frank Sinatra's, clearly it's Frank Sinatra's kid right here. This is not Woody Allen's kid we're looking at.
Oh, really? Right? You don't think?
I don't think so. And so, like, yeah. I don't
think Ronan thinks so either. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure.
So what would have happened? Like, this is the thing. Like, what would the mob have done to retaliate over this whole situation? They wouldn't be going after Mia. They would be going after the Holocaust survivor, when they're like all tied up with like these like, and what would they do? So it's not even that Polanski didn't do the things that he did. He did things. I'm sorry, like this isn't me making excuses. This is just the reality. He did things that are commonplace in Hollywood, but that he was hung out to dry by a media that was totally connected in with all these same people who freaking had it out for him following this event. Like, it's so crazy. Like, so, you know, the reaction to Polanski could have just as easily have gone towards Jack Nicholson or like hundreds of people in Hollywood, because the casting agencies are doubling as prostitution rings. And like there's every indication that what happened with Polanski in 1980 or whatever was a gift from Nicholson. So like, I know this is something I've been fixated on for so many years, because like there's sides to it, and I'll tell you, like, I really feel like Tracy Twyman kind of like did a real good job of like kind of tying that all together, you know? Like, it's crazy. Like, and the slipping of the Mickey thing in the film and everything, it's like the layers of it are just insane.
So in a Synctank way, I got a question that maybe there's no real answer to, but it's like, is this orchestration or is it like finding a pattern in the code?
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that where's the line between the conspiracy and the synchronicity, right? Because it's like
Or
there's certain
it's
things.
almost like if you're like know how to navigate the seas with the wind alone, right? With a sailboat, you could be convinced like that dude's controlling the wind. Like he's making the wind go that direction because that's the direction he needs to go in, versus knowing how to take any directional breeze and turn it into like the different kinetic energy that you need at that time. And it's like if you're able to be so masterful, it's almost like from the outside it looks like there's controlling, but if you know what you're doing, you don't need the control because you're just kind of surfing with the waves.
Yeah, I feel like Polanski was put in his place by a power structure that's like been in control of like Hollywood and beyond for a really long time.
He was like a collapsed function, the same way that Epstein was.
Yeah, if Manson had a real trial, like they didn't let him defend himself because they said the argument was that his powers of persuasion and hypnosis were so strong that he like whatever. That's what lawyers do all the time, right?
Yeah, like what?
They're like, no, he was too, you know, like whatever.
He's too good. He can't do it.
He has magical powers.
If he had actually had a real trial, it would have blown the cover on a lot of the high weirdness in Hollywood at the time, for real. Like the Susan Atkins, bro, he's involved with the Satanic Church. Like they would have had to have addressed that, you know, that Tate and Susan Atkins had a connection through the Satanic Church. Like when Susan did the thing on LSD where she's Sharon's murderer. She shortly before the murders had like an event where she like was on acid in a coffin and like comes out of the coffin pretending to be a vampire, like, and like had a whole thing with like pointing at her next victim or whatever in this display. Like there's footage of this, like this thing happened. It sounds crazy, but it's absolutely true. And I think Tracy talked about it. I know it's been talked about elsewhere, but like that should have been in the court proceedings. Like that, where is that in the transcript? Like, because we're talking about a cult, the Manson cult, but there's this giant cult that she had some involvement with, that Susan also had involvement with, yet it seems to be completely left out. And then with Polanski, he had a real trial. Like if you go into specifics around the way that played out, it's absurd. Like that whole thing where they said, you're going to go into this institution, they're going to determine if you're depraved. And he said, the judge said, I'm so sure that they're going to say that, you know, you're going to stay in this place. And they said no. And so he's like, well, you know, I don't know what we're going to take it from here. And that's when Polanski fled. Almost as though they wanted him to flee. That's the impression I get. Like, just go away. Like, because it seems like had he had a real trial, similar with Manson, it would have blown the lid on pedophile rings and prostitution in general that was happening in Hollywood. And so, like, because there's every indication that was an organized type of thing. Like the parent wanted the child to make it in the industry, and this is how it works. This is what goes on. And so, like, we're a long time coming. Like, this is something that, like, there's multiple occasions that the lid should have been blown off of it going through the years. And now we're here talking about Epstein. Like, why wasn't this exposed way back when? And why do we have these specific people that are guilty, but we will make scapegoats out of while excusing so much of the other stuff that's going on for so long? Like, going back even to the heyday of Hollywood. And like there's been a lot of like disinformation campaigns that have kernels of truth throughout, like what we see with Kenneth Anger's work, like where there's just like a bunch of like baloney like mixed with like very real things that need to be addressed that were never really seriously addressed. So
there was another thing that came up in Tracy's work that I hadn't heard. I mean, I've heard the connection, but I've never had it explained and laid out in such an easy to understand fashion. And that was that the murders were originally a retribution. Correct me on this, but someone at some point had been sold like bad mescaline. I don't know if it was fake, if it was bad or whatever, but that was like this catalyst for this event. And then the person that did that, they end up getting like publicly humiliated and beat up. And then Manson was like, oh man, that guy was in my crew. Now I have to like react to this by doing something similar to someone on this other side. And then it just becomes this ultimate escalation. And then you get the Tate Bianca murders.
What's that guy's name who did the Chaos book? Something. What is his name? Do you read that?
Another thing that I'm behind on, I've seen the documentary, which everyone hates, but I haven't read the book yet.
Well, the documentary, I watched that, but and it had a lot of things that are important in the mix. But like, if you actually compare it to like the 3-part Manson series that came out, I think it was freaking like, was it Netflix even? Like, it's actually better. Like the 3-part series was actually better than the documentary on Chaos. And it's weird that the documentary Chaos doesn't seem to cover everything that's in this book from Tom O'Neill.
40 minutes that represents, I guess, something like 20 plus years of research. So
there's things in the 3-part series that came out relatively recently. There's things in that I've been saying for years that were not in any of there's been so many documentaries of Manson. There's things that I have not seen addressed in such a serious way. There's also the Jay Sebring documentary that came out a while back. That one's also kind of indispensable because there's official narratives around what happened with Jay Sebring that even his closest friends until relatively recently didn't know were bogus, like that the media had perpetuated. And they would show in this documentary, they would actually show like the police record reports and everything, and they'll show it to friends of Jay Sebring, and they would just be shocked that because they believed what the media told them at the time, and then went on 30, 40 years later to continue believing it. Like, it's crazy. But yeah.
Just some weird stuff also about Paul Newman, right? Because Paul Newman was like an undercover, I don't want to say agent exactly, but pretty close, right? That's
agent. I feel like agent is generic enough to apply in a lot of without being speaking of agents, another thing that Tracy Twyman spelled out very specifically that has only been hinted at in like other things that I've read was the progression from Satanism into Scientology, and that she makes a very specific claim that L. Ron Hubbard was intelligence that infiltrates the occult as opposed to the occult infiltrating intelligence, which is maybe it's like goes back and forth because you come think of Operation Snow White, so it really is occult infiltrating intelligence, but like, is this a chicken or an egg thing when it comes to L. Ron Hubbard? Did L. Ron Hubbard get into Aleister Crowley and OTO because the intelligence agencies wanted him to, or did he get into the intelligence agencies from like an occult perspective?
I think it's a mix. I think it's a bit of both. Because if you read Confessions from his autohagiography, and you read Secret Agent 666, you can find uncanny parallels that confirm in both directions. So when he's talking about a working, and then he has some espionage thing he's doing, I don't think that there's a real line between the two. Like,
so they're just both happening at the same time.
It's a different way of communicating it. So there's multiple sides at the same time. Like, it's kind of like when you were discussing that gulf of distinction between synchronicity or a conspiracy. Like, one is intentional and one is the intelligence of I don't know, some more natural process, like would be described in the film Pi or something, you know, where you're like, you know, it's
like Echo, right, or whatever.
The line is in the sand, like, and you can totally look at it both ways, and like you penetrate the the shell of the synchronicity or of the conspiracy, and you actually like enter into the synchronicity. Like it's actually like they're it's like a continuum, you know?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I think this is a Peter Levenda quote. Was the JFK assassination a particle or a wave?
That's one of the best quotes you could address to it. Yeah, it's true.
It's crazy
So-
looking at some of these websites, like these kind of cracked out 2007, 2010 looking websites here, all about Tracy Twyman, but most of them are pretty intense. You know, this is Tracy Twyman death and Tracy Twyman death, Tracy Twyman death. And there seems to be a lot of people that have an opinion that something strange happened, particularly around the Sean Bryant Alger guy, right? The money in her death. I mean, do you really? I mean, again, I know we've talked about this to an extent, but how do you feel about? Do you just cool people die? Is that all there is to it? Should we just like let it be because like that happens?
Stink doesn't kill people. People kill people. I like what Kyle here says in the comments where he says John D, original agent 007, Renaissance occultist. They say that because his signature does look like 2 O's. It's supposed to be glasses, I guess, but it's like the top of the 7 goes over the 2 O's.
Right. Yeah, it's someone that's holding up glasses.
From Queen's magician to Elrond's nautical obsessions, the intelligence game has always needed mystical cover. Like,
and another good point too. I mean, Masonry or Templar, whatever it is, when you get into these secret societies and these occult sort of like mystery schools, the name of the game is can you keep a secret, right? So they've always had a shared. What's that?
Number one requirement, right?
Number one requirement is can you keep a secret? And if you can prove you can, and you've got this institution that is kind of like vetting you, this is your LinkedIn profile that's like, oh, he's kept secrets for X, Y, and Z. Look at all these corporations. He's keeping good on his NDAs essentially. So yeah, we can bring him on board. He's low risk individual. That's sort of this vetting process. So of course, if you were to set up an intelligence agency, you would draw from the oldest intelligence agency we've ever known, which is just people that promise they'll keep secrets and then put on a different colored hat.
Right. If you know the basics around like, conspiracy stuff surrounding the JFK assassination, and then you look at George Sr., dude, you know that he was made the head of the CIA because of his ability to keep a secret around what happened in Dealey Plaza that day when he was there.
Plus, he was tall. Like tall guys.
It's kind of a requirement.
And Prescott had put in quite the momentum for him as well with the Harriman connection, and it was always going to happen, in my opinion. Like it was always going to happen so much that even his idiot kid ended up getting some of the spillover over how much he was going to become president, regardless.
Right. Even if the people of Texas didn't even want him to be president, they wanted him to stay in Texas, it didn't matter.
Bunkport, you can still use some of that overflowing cup, right? Like he is the closest thing that you could convince me that Holy Blood, Holy Grail is real, and there's like an actual bloodline, although it's been distorted clearly, unless I don't know, like a la Hillman, like even J-Man was like already running with some dark energy.
Did you drink blood out of Geronimo's skull? Yeah, we did a lot of wild stuff.
Right. That was the least of what they did, clearly.
Well, I mean, a big part of Tracy's work was also in 2008, like right around Obama election time, and it was when people were more, I mean, there were people like us. There were people that were like, oh, this is not safe. The world's not going in the great direction. And this is wolf in sheep's clothing. I think a lot of us were worried that the wolf in sheep's clothing aspect of 2008, it was Pepsi selling this Shepherd Ferry Obey mainstream media for the establishment, for the government, but it was people were under the impression it was a new government rather than a continuation of the neoconservative agenda, where it was really clear that was what was going on. And Tracy talked about MK Ultra at a time. I mean, I feel like a lot of people were really happy in 2007 and 2008.
Well, that was the first time to talk about like the culture war stuff. Is that in 2008 that was the first time that I saw in my life where if you took a position against somebody's politics, you were viewed a racist. So like with especially like early on, before the bombs were dropped and he had already gotten like the Nobel Peace Prize for I'm not sure exactly what, like if you raise concerns about like who he chose for the Secretary of the Treasury or who he chose for the Secretary of Defense or something, you were like viewed as a racist by this kind of like tribalist scene that was just we hate George W. Bush. It was like this huge, like it was,
Yeah.
which is ironic because my issue with George W.
Played
was
the
this
foot.
whole with us or against us thing, and like that's happening even among my current like liberal friends, like where they're still doing that thing of like you're with us or against us if you express anything other than a very specific narrative. If you don't repeat the script but you have something else to say, all of a sudden there's this questioning of like, are you an other? And like that feels very much like George Bush's presidency time, as far as like the paranoia or the freak out over the terrorist attacks, like following the terrorist attacks. There was this like, are you on board or not? And it's like, if you even questioned him at all, it's like, we're not going to entertain any conspiracy theories, and then it was like, but then that translated over to Obama, like we're not allowed to question this.
We don't have time for the Flat Earth
now.
Society, a meeting for the Flat Earth Society. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, but isn't that the Nietzsche quote of like the monsters thing, where it's like you're focused on the monsters and you yourself become the monster? Like I just watched that happen with Obama, where it's like you're doing the same thing that you were so freaked out about Bush doing, and you don't even see it. It came through the back door, just crazy.
It's
Blind
funny
spots.
you mentioned Nietzsche, because I tried my best for like the 5th time to get all the way through Thus Spake Zarathustra, and
I'll tell you what the problem is. I'll tell you what it is. I had to figure this out, and somebody schooled me. I was wrong about something, so I was like recommending to people like a version of that book that I had read in hardback that was, and it wasn't written like, because it's the translations, except for I think one of them, all have this kind of old English style to them, like it's like biblical text, where apparently if you spoke German, that that's totally inappropriate for like the way that book was actually written. They did it to make
like
it
a
more
slang version of this.
There's a version that's actually the version you want to read, which I haven't read. I just I knew somebody who was like calling me out on my recommendation. I was like, wait, what? Oh, maybe I don't actually know what I'm talking about. Like, I read the book and I shouldn't have read that version. Like, I should have read the version that's not done in that old English kind of style. So, which exists and I guess is the better one. But yeah.
Well, it was just crazy you brought that one up, but there was like another weird connection between the Tracy Twyman book that I started out with, Genuflect, and then this whole parable of carrying this dead man that was on his back. Like he comes out the little door and the overmensch jumps over the undermensch and the undermensch falls, but like he falls in such a perfect way. But then Zarathustra puts him on his back and he's came around and he finds this old guy in the woods and he's like, we're starving. Can you give me some food? And he's like, well, that guy in your back needs the food more than you do, clearly. So let's make sure he gets fed first. And then he eventually realizes like, why am I carrying this old dead thing around on me? And I guess that was like the obvious version of like, this is why we don't have the Superman, is because we're too busy carrying all these dead people around on our backs and trying to feed the dead people, that like we're not like improving ourselves and getting big and strong. Like we keep throwing our calcium away and like, I don't know. That was the way that I was kind of interpreting that.
Yeah, in the Holy Mountain when he's got the midget on his back and he like or he's like a paraplegic or something and he throws him off the boat, and it's like it's also kind of like Pilgrim's Progress, right? Where he's got the burden that he needs to get rid of the burden, like you're just carrying this thing around, it's just weighing on you. Yeah.
Yeah, but that paraplegic can roll a cigarette better than he can and light it.
It's
realistically.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's weird thinking about how much the world shifted though in that time, like from 2004. I mean, I guess also I didn't follow Tracy Twyman back in the 90s, but apparently there was like the Dagobert or whatever that she was writing, right? It's kind of like a journal that existed. And so, but 2004 or something on, I was more aware of, and you could see, especially 2008, it was, more important. In 2012, all of a sudden, this was pretty mainstream how the world had shifted, that we knew everything that we'd heard from the Freedom of Information Act in the 90s about the Clinton administration or about the Bush administration, but that somehow it was being rebranded, that It was a good thing. It was like, well, no, now that stuff's in the hands of the Obama administration, and we want them to like give that man a gun. That's
amazing. It's like what they did with Big Pharma, whereas like in all of these things that we used to have these really like, we'd share these kind of like, well, yeah, look at what the scam is, like, look at how they're scamming us. And now it's like, there's like jumping to the defense of Big Pharma. I'm like, PR is amazing how they've managed to do that. It's incredible. Like, is that just money? Like, to be able to
I
make
think it's
that, to buy
propaganda.
people's minds?
it's propaganda too, because it's like, I mean, I remember that song came out. My president is black, my Lambo is blue. Remember that song, right? And that had such a vibe. People were really like, wow, like this is the best time that I've ever been alive because my president is black and my Lambo is blue. Neither one of those things were true. You know what I mean? No one had a blue Lambo or a black president. It wasn't real, right?
Well, you saw my tweet today about the time warp, right? So somebody mentioned something about the time warp and Project Warp Speed or whatever. It seems to imply something there. But like that whole thing, that's been since 2008. I've related to the song "The Time Warp" as though it's like totally about politics because it's just a step to the left, another step to the right. Give it 4 years, give it 8 years, and then it's the pelvic thrust that really drives you insane because you're getting screwed by whoever it is. That's like the point of the song, as far as I can tell. Which somebody pointed out in the thread too that it kind of speaks to like the rest of the film, like the degeneration of society, you know. But
plus the time warp, just generally that we're doing a time warp again, you know, that this is something that they constantly are going through, and it's changing both time itself and the way we perceive reality, right?
Right, because the Back to the Future Trump connection, like that's what we're talking about. That's the Make America Great Again thing, which I was also like, not enough people have like watched the Funny or Die with Johnny Depp playing Trump movie. It's like I think it's the old Funny or Die movie. It's got Alf in it. We've discussed it before. It's got Christopher Lloyd,
one, but they also made a Steve
Lloyd
Jobs
shows
one.
up. Oh, do they? Oh, yeah. That's right. Which is the play on the
really good
TV
it
one.
Was great. I thought that was awesome.
I forgot about that one. Yeah, but they do the thing where Christopher Lloyd shows up in this film and is like from the future telling Trump like in the 80s like where it's headed, and it's like Trump shows up with after that with, you know, he's like warning him or whatever. But like, yeah, is this the full thing? But actually what's even better than this is actually if you sync this, which I have with the Roger Waters album, Is This the Life We Really Want? It's tight. But it's so ridiculous. Especially Alf. Alf is the best part of the whole thing, especially if you consider him as like the symbolism with the archetypal fool, you know, that Alf is Aleph and all of that. But
there we go.
Yeah, there he is.
Lloyd, right, showing up and explaining what's going to happen in his future. There's just so much to this. And didn't Ron Howard have something to do with this particular?
He narrates it, yeah. Which is really appropriate on
for Funny or Die to be that big. It's interesting because Funny or Die was like a YouTube group out of New York City, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger until, I mean, to me, it seems like the clearest US aid kind of thing that Funny or Die ended up as important as it was without really necessarily earning it. However, there were some pretty cool sketches that they did on YouTube. It's just, to me, it's interesting like how much power they had to be able to make a movie in a week, and they made multiple movies that just took a week long, and they were really, I don't know, but where's credits to.
Well, Zach Galifianakis and the people that were participating, and also just that like indie relationship to comedy sometimes is more funny like than the contrived Hollywood stuff, even if you have like people that were doing stuff in Hollywood, but then it's like they just, you know, did something with some kid on their own, like the landlord bit with Will Ferrell where the landlord's like a 4-year-old girl who shows up drunk, you know, and it's just like, you know, it's got like the subtitles where it's hilarious, you know.
Yeah,
but,
they did pretty good. I really like the Steve Jobs one because it's like they have they clearly didn't watch any Steve Jobs movie or look into Steve Jobs' life at all, except for what they all kind of had heard at some point.
It's like drunk
grapevine. Yeah, it was like a drunk history, but better because these weren't even computer nerds. Well, so they had so little of an idea. But dude, like, well, you know, it's in the zeitgeist.
You know that there's that made-for-TV movie from the 90s about Steve Jobs where it's got that scene in it with the acid scene where he like
Pirates of Silicon Valley.
Is that what it is? He shows up and he's got like their company's failing. They're like trying to sell computers with like wooden frames door to door, and it's just like going under. And it's like and they're like all, you know, following the 60s. So it's like I think the 1970s, right?
You're talking about this one, right?
Is this Is
Pirates
this
of Silicon Valley is such a good movie. I love this movie.
So he's like, let's just drop this sunshine acid and screw it. And then all these nerds are like, what, Steve? No way, bro. And then he just like takes it all to himself and ends up like doing some kind of like symphony on the floor. Like he's just, you know, it's so funny.
This is real. Like Pirates of Silicon Valley, relatively accurate. That's one of the more accurate versions of Steve Jobs' life. The Funny or Die movie has like Bill Gates' wife, Melinda Gates, has sex with Steve Jobs using Oculus VR headset, like in Demolition Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there's just so much. It's classy. Great movie.
I have a friend who I won't say his name because I don't know if he'd want to advertise this, but he used to work directly under Steve Jobs, and he described how this incident would occur apparently more than once, but where he would shout a lot at people, and he from his office you could hear the stuff that he was shouting at people. Like it wasn't like a secret. Like he was like a very assertive person, right? We lost the wrong billionaire, by the way, in my opinion. I'm talking about like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Come on. But like, not that he didn't have his issues, but he would literally shout at people to like go home right now. You got to take some LSD, get something creative.
Henry
come
Luce,
back.
This
like,
exact same thing was said about Henry Luce at Time Life magazine, that he would yell this at people openly in the middle of his, although I think it was more of like an enthusiastic as opposed to like demanding you do it, but it was the same message.
Yeah, like come back with something creative. You're not giving me anything creative. Take time off, go drop acid, come back, see what you're coming with. Like it was just that was how he operated. That's like, I don't know how
they should have some Silicon Valley like Fortune 500s that when you sign up you get a drug test, but you don't pee in a cup. They give you some of whatever your company decides is the most important.
I mean, that sounds like LA, really, but
dude, okay, I want to point something out. Okay, you guys, I don't know if you guys watched Severance. I know we discussed it at some point, but if you look at The Office and Severance, like all I see, like, so that's produced by Apple. So like, I don't know if I talk about this, but like the Apple Studios on Savile Row, it's like identical. So if you watch the documentary of the Beatles called Get Back about their rooftop thing, when they're producing Abbey Road and Let It Be at the same time, and you look at the floor of that studio, see if you can find a picture of it. But it looks you look at the floor, like this. That's not it. Yeah, there it is. But if you watch a documentary now where it's all like, digitally enhanced or whatever, like the floor is even greener than that. But the point is that it's got this exact green floor in the white space or whatever. That was Apple produced Severance. That was Apple Studios. And, Apple bought Apple. So Apple Computers bought Apple Records. So you remember like Michael Jackson used to own like all the Beatles rights. And he sold them to pay for his, court proceedings accusing him of
witch trials against him, right?
Yeah, right. So it's like, but anyway, I think it's far out anyway, like that Apple bought Apple, you don't say, like, and then like this show, like, and even like the implications, like it's 4, I mean, like the 4 Beatles, and you got the 4 seats, and then there comes a point in the show where they change it to 3 because somebody leaves, right? And it's all weird. They're like, oh, 3 is weird. And I'm like thinking Paul is dead, obviously. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah. There's all sorts of like, I'm like, I don't know, like the intention behind it or whatever. It's one of those things like sync versus conspiracy or whatever. But yeah, it's trippy.
That's an interesting point. I have to really finish Severance for that reason. I mean,
it's also been pointed out to me by my friend Dona. He mentioned how if you were to do an aerial view of that room in Severance, it basically forms the shape of a Gamadian.
Yeah, or a swastika. Yeah,
swastika is what I thought. Yeah.
Well, Gamadian's a Greek word. He's just doing the right thing. Good job, Thomas. We're all slow. Yeah.
That's based.
Yeah, I mean, every single one of them, right? And there's something to that for sure. There's a reason for that. I don't know. Apple's pretty crazy that they're putting so much money into that show, but I was thinking about that too, because what are they going to do with their money otherwise? So this is their way of paying each other or something. Like, so it's so crazy to spend that much money on a show that's about people in a one room stage.
Right. Well, this relates to the Twyman stuff with Rosemary's Baby for a variety of reasons. I could say a million things, but there's like Full Circle, the film Full Circle, also called The Haunting of Julia. That film is with Mia Farrow and Keira DeLay, who's David Bowman from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Their child in the first scene chokes on this green apple, and so everything that follows, like it's so layered. Like I got a sync film on this on Twitter somewhere. I could share it. I think I just wrote for Sean on it if you were to look it up, but if you're looking for keywords or whatever. But like this movie is freaking like it had to be made for like sync purposes. Like it takes, because 2001: A Space Odyssey and Rosemary's Baby are both films about childbirth, but one is about the Mashiach, which is 2001, which follows the 777 lightning flash, whereas Rosemary's Baby is like all about like the 216 Gevora, like Antichrist. So you have like Christ and the Antichrist, and they both like the two films like follow. It's like both have the birth at the end of the film, like they're the same length even. Like it's crazy. Like if you start Rosemary's Baby right at the dawn of man in 2001, they'll both like cut to credits at the end. Yeah, there it is. If you want, yeah. But I wrote for Sean because I feel like the thing was like, oh my God, I feel like this isn't something I was supposed to be looking at. Like it didn't feel like it was for me. Like I went to years ago when I was putting this thing together, I went to a very weird place with it because it's just like it's John Lennon's last album before his death and John Lennon's album after his death. So you have Milk and Honey is the first like post-mortem album that he was working on at the time. So yeah, Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey, and followed by Instant Karma and Who Has Seen the Wind, which was a single. Yeah. You want to say something, Thomas?
Some of this starts to feel like one of those death spirals that the ants do around like a cell phone or whatever, because like as you're talking like all this Sing stuff, because now you've got the connection that John Lennon buys the building in which this birth happens, and then John Lennon himself dies outside of the building in which a birth happens. Now you have this death, and then Apple owns John Lennon now, right? So now Apple also owns Rosemary's Baby in a weird sort of way, right?
John just had a room at or an apartment at the Dakota. But so did Rosemary, right? So, and keep in mind, Mia Farrow was with the Beatles right before filming started for Rosemary's Baby in India. And then the second song on the White Album is Dear Prudence, because they were with Prudence Farrow, Mia's sister, who wouldn't leave the closet, so to speak, with her meditation. So she is her whole life had just gone into meditation, and she was super disconnected. And they're like, that song is them like calling to Mia Farrow's sister to like come out and enjoy the day. You know, and it's deep.
Twyman also mentions another one of their songs that was like, oh man, it was like Lucy something or other. It was about like a
guy with diamonds
was getting into like drugs and partying and shouldn't have been, and that was a reference to maybe the girl that was with Manson at some point. So there was all these other like the Beatles referencing, we know about these cults and these weird things happening. We're in on the knowledge about it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? What song it is?
Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?
Oh, so no.
We're talking about in the PDF, right?
I'm referencing the PDF, yes.
Yeah, there is some stuff in there. Yeah, she even, it's a mystery
tour. Like a song about a girl being loose, but like the sick part of it in the Beatle way was that like it's a young girl that's being loose. So it's like a not a criticism of the girl as much as it is about like what's allowing her. Oh, I wish I could remember the name of the damn song. It's a Beatles song.
I just got asked by Eric, has Sean commented on any of your stuff, David? Yes, interesting. I got interesting from him. I've had some back and forth with Sean at times. Like he's pretty accessible on Twitter, but one of the ones that he responded to was Oasis. What is what's the story? Morning Glory with the film Wonderwall.
Sexy Sadie,
which is basically a Beatles film without the Beatles in it. It's like produced by George Harrison. So the film Wonderwall is what the song Wonderwall on What's the Story Morning Glory is referring to. So yeah, he's commented on that one.
It was so the song was Sexy Sadie, and what Tracy Twyman claims in one of her books was that Sexy Sadie was about Sadie Mae Glutz or Glutes, who was referenced by people within the Manson family as Sexy Sadie. So that like that song in particular was about a very real specific incident that happened.
Susan was called Sadie in the group, but you're right. So that was the ultimate reference, but then she identified that way in their own trip, according to Helter Skelter, and I don't even know certain parts of Helter Skelter, because that's written by the prosecution. So like I don't know which parts are true and which aren't. Although I just saw recently that Susan Atkins has actually published a book like not long ago that I think it's called The Helter Skelter Myth. I haven't heard anyone talk about it. I'm curious of what she has to say at this point. She's got to be so old, but like somebody brought up also Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I like to just iterate this point, that the point, in as far as I can tell, that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood really takes off from the factual based story beyond Cliff Booth and whatever, the two guys, but where they really take off as far as the Manson murders themselves go in like a fantasy direction, or like an alternate timeline direction, is after the scene in the car when Tex Watson asks the girls in the back if they're calling him a liar, when he tells them that Manson told us to do this. So he's like, Manson said to do this, right? You're not calling me a liar, are you? Which, if like Tarantino is so clearly communicating that we're taking the word of one of the known murderers as the authority on why they did what they did and what happened. So like, is that a reliable source? So it's like, that's the beauty of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, is that he fictionalizes the happening, but then he's kind of like communicating to you that this whole basis of what we're relating to with Helter Skelter is how are we supposed to know what happened? We're relying on the words of one of the participants in the murder, who's instructing the girls in the scene what the story is, what the narrative is before they go into it. So it's like he's asserting to them, like, we're sticking with this narrative. And so then Tarantino breaks from the whole narrative that we all know and are familiar with, which, like I was saying with the Jay Sebring thing, he got close friends of his that don't even know until recently what actually happened with their friend. Like, they thought he was killed in a totally different way. Like, all these different factors. Like, it's bizarre. Like, yeah.
Can you catch me up on Jay Sebring?
So this is the argument that it was a haircut that killed Jim Morrison. So like, because Jim Morrison had always gotten his haircut from this one guy, Jay Sebring, during his
and Jay Sebring is the guy he was the hair, he did it for everybody, for Randy, for Paul Newman, and everybody. Like Tate.
We're talking about probably like a hairdresser, Jay Sebring,
right?
Hairdresser
in Hollywood, you just kind of fail upwards, So like actually. But that's why we brought up earlier, because Sebring, like in terms of Jay Sebring, is a Manson victim, but he was a hairstylist who was famous for doing, both women and men's hair for all of the early '60s movies until like '68, right? Whenever he
So
died.
There was a 4-way relationship. So he and we've been over this, but I always forget the other guy's name who was in the relationship, because he left Hollywood over it. Like, he was so devastated because he it was like they were like, pre-love era representatives in Hollywood, right? Like, the scene at their place was very much like just a total free-for-all. And so like, there's also apparently films of them, like, people say things about it. I think what it was just they film their sex. So like, Polanski was a film director, so she would be with these other guys too, but they all seemed to be cool with it. There's no point where you see like an indication of like real drama as far as that part of their lives are concerned. So Jay Sebring was in long story short, Jay Sebring was in a relationship with Sharon Tate, just as Polanski was, even though as far as the public was concerned, it was just Polanski's wife, But
I mean, he was definitely like, because a lot of these actors were kind of bisexual, and so he was around Frank Sinatra, he was around Steve McQueen. Yep. Steve McQueen's, I mean, I'm not saying just because Queen's in his name, but like, look into it a little bit. There's some weird stuff that was going on in Hollywood with hairdressers and actors. It is what it is.
Tracy Twyman brings up Frank Sinatra in the exact same.
Oh God, he was totally.
Frank Sinatra was the Marilyn Monroe of Frank Sinatra.
Right. Totally, yeah. I mean, if you go back, and you knew this before that, because if you saw like cartoons in the 40s, right, where they have, or 50s, where Frank Sinatra is, they mock Frank Sinatra. It's always this fatigued waif who can't write. He needs people to wheel him around because he's too weak to join the army, right? Because he crooner. He was a crooner who tried to avoid service, his necessary service. Said he was 4F and got out of going to World War II, right? So a lot of people already looked at him like, who's this guy who can finagle, and he's got these connections that can get him out of doing what everyone else has to do, right? Sacrificing, well, because he's so strong or because he's so weak. And it's just, it's already at that
high
point.
Hopes to get Kennedy elected. So the song High Hopes. And, so then that was the whole deal there, is that the mob was all in thinking he was going to be like his dad, Mr. Bootlegger, and his family that he would just go with their program. And so when he started it's like, I love to equate it with like, it's like a whodunit. It's like Clue, because when you look at the whole scene, you're like, everybody has a reason, or like Knives Out or something. You're like, everybody involved has a reason to want to kill Kennedy, you know. So and also Robert
JFK
too.
really, I mean, because he was, you know, Frank Sinatra was rebuilding his manor, his mansion, his villa, to have a special suite just for JFK. And when he got the call, essentially, that JFK would never be coming to visit him ever, I think that was a pretty clear picture the way things were going to go. And that's, I mean, immediately after that, you've got the Bay of Pigs, you've got Cuba, you've got everything going on with the mob being forced to leave Florida, you know, forced to leave Cuba and like end up in Nevada, right?
The very next place on
reservation,
Robert Kennedy's itinerary from the speech in which he was murdered was to meet up with Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. This is about, I think, 10 days before the theatrical release of Rosemary's Baby when he was killed. And so it was that day, that night, he was supposed to go have dinner with Polanski. So like, there's like, it's so enmeshed, you know? And like, some of it just feels so unbelievable. Like, I've had times looking at this stuff where I like have to look back and forth. Like, I'll find a source that's a solid source, and I'll have to look at it like so many times, be like, that can't be really. It's like,
and I guess in a weird way, but it's almost like I originally thought of MK Ultra as this like needle in a haystack, right? That if you look in enough or like a whole bunch of needles in a very huge,
it's like a pile of needles. It's a needle in a pile of needles, bro.
It is a pile. If you look long enough, you can find all these different needles, but over time, it feels more like it's just like a drop of ink in a bucket of water. Like it has become so pervasive that in JFK, as
like a razor blade in a cupcake.
JFK could throw a dart in any direction and hit some kind of MK Ultra related thing that was going to eventually take him down some sort of way, right? So it wasn't even like you could avoid it. Like we are MK Ultra. Like everything is MK Ultra at this point because it was so far reaching.
Every woman,
Bush and JFK and everything.
Right. It's like the Water Tate, you know, conspiracy.
So on.
Well, you said like Watergate, Tate, like there's like it's so maddening with complexity, you know what I mean? Like, and then we find out that Watergate was like this giant honeypot, and that was like the real deal of what was happening. Like, it's not like we have like a superficial story that we're relating to, or they just wanted to know what was going on with their like, this is something that happens every day now, but it happens on the internet. You don't have to physically break in to the place to get the files, but apparently that was like largely about a big honeypot that was happening, and they were like breaking in to get the.
I think a better analogy for what I was trying to get to, I guess, is that MK Ultra is like microplastics. Like it's in your balls right now, even if you live in a mountain in Tibet, like you still have it inside your testicles, right? Or whatever you identify as having.
Well, what's crazy about MK Ultra is that when it first came out, when there was like the first like proceedings around it, it was laughed out of court. So like before the victims came forward, there's like what I think it was like 300 something. Many of them testified that were part of this like class action lawsuit against the CIA. Like, you know, before that happened, like when they brought it up, they joked about the LSD factor, and it was all these squares in the room with the proceedings. They just had to, they made a joke out of it. That's why like that the Men Who Stare at Goats is so messed up, because like it's a comedy about something that's so terrible, that's so real. And you're like, you put Ewan McGregor in it, and they just make it into this like, because he was a Jedi, and they did Jedis, and they make like this whole joke out of it. But like they give one indication in one scene where it's like the guy's locked in the room. It's like, I don't know what they had him. He was watching Dark Side of the Rainbow or Barney or something, and they like refer to it as like, they're like, that's the dark side. There's like one little part, and the rest of it is just like a big humorous thing. It's like literally what happened with MK Ultra initially, where it just got laughed out, and then they're like, oh wait, they were drilling holes in people's heads and forcing them to listen to recordings on 30
like the Aztecs.
You know? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I'd like to actually consider that more. Some of the synchromistic aspects of the many hysteric goats, like the fact that it's the Jedi and they're using Obi-Wan, that one sticks out super strongly. But there's a lot of things in there. For instance, I think the ER doctor aspect of George Clooney's character, because he's constantly playing the sort of like ER operator who's supposed to do, you know, he's and if you ever watched ER, like how he's such a great doctor, such a meticulous doctor, but he's this crazy person. It plays into his remote viewing because he's the psychic, you know, professional in a lot of ways.
Wait, wasn't the Men Who Stare at Goats written by John Ronson? Am I correct about that? It's the same guy who was the only person in the world in 2010 to have access to all of Stanley Kubrick's archives, who would help Alex Jones infiltrate Bohemian Grove. And
the book is right. Yeah, the book is written by John
year
Ronson.
2000.
There you go. Yeah.
So my question, I haven't read the book. I would like to talk.
I have not either.
Yeah, I wonder, how does he feel about what happened? Like, didn't he contribute to the film itself too? Like, was the book just a big comedy like that? Because he's a serious guy, John Ronson. So, like, I don't even know. Like, how does he feel about the way that they made? Was it hilarious when he wrote it too, or I don't even know. You know.
I'll have to get that done. I'll probably listen to it. That's the way to do it. Break down the book, Men Who Stare at Goats, chapter by chapter, Grok. That's what we'll do right now.
Generate the cliff notes now.
Oh, Super Grok.
Yeah, Super Grok. Let's just see it.
It's
Let's see
like
how it works.
Grok.
Hey, below is a chapter by chapter breakdown of the Men Who Stare at Goats. Please, everyone, from now on, if you haven't read a book and you don't have time to do it in like a 5-minute conversation because you need the data right now, check it out. Section 1, the 70s to the 80s, the origin of psychic warfare. Chapter 2, the Master Sergeant and the Goat. I mean, you can follow all these key themes, bizarre reality. Okay, how funny is the book compared to the movie?
That's the question, right?
That's the real question. To compare the humor of the book to its film adaptation, we need to just consider the different tones.
Just get to it, Grok.
Yeah, succinctly.
So the book is non-fiction investigative work with a darkly comedic absurdist tone. That works. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Book, dry, ironic humor from absurd real-life military experiments. Moderately funny, more cerebral than laugh out loud with darker
There you
themes.
go.
I get that because also I recently rewatched Secrets of Bohemian Grove or whatever the movie, which is Alex Jones footage and editing of this. But there is.
Oh, I thought you meant the musical.
They're two different documentaries.
Well, when he meets up with John Ronson, there's this thing like this classic dry humor way where John Ronson's like, "All right, now Alex, you're not going to get us arrested or anything, right?" And you know that he's saying it in a joking way because Alex kind of like laughs at it, and he's using it to break the tension. But you know, like 99.9% of that is like, "No, but really, you're not going to get us arrested, right?"
Yeah.
But I feel like that's
please
kind
just
of
make this a normal field trip, Miss
Right. Can I point out that Mythocast in the comments says funny because I shared a snippet of David calls it a masterpiece. Thank you. Sorry, Cassandra, I misunderstood with PKD talking and put it into a little X post. Hamish Sinclair, the guy that runs the old story page. But the thing is that in Sorry, Cassandra, I misunderstood, I go back and forth showing Alex Jones's footage from his documentary and compare it to John Ronson's, and you can literally see different camera angles in the places where what's left out of one that's included in the other. But the takeaway for me was that you can clearly see that repeatedly Alex Jones is going to John Ronson every time he has a question, and it's clearly John Ronson is the one in the know, and Alex Jones is just like excited talking about Moloch and what is going on. But he's like, he's the kid in the candy store, Alex Jones is, and the Mr. Candyman is John Ronson. So, kind of crazy.
I get that whole vibe watching that. Even from Alex Jones' perspective, you absolutely see that. Like, he's the giddy kid in the candy store that can't decide like what he wants to focus on the most, and he's sort of the wild card. But he's also the one, I guess, that like makes that a thing. Like, if it was just John Ronson infiltrating Bohemian Grove, we're not talking about it right now.
Yeah, and John Ronson, I don't think he wanted to do that. He was just watching. He's like, wow, this Alex guy is like, he's supercharged. He wants to go do it. He's like, I'll help you out, but up to this point. And
it was part of Them, right? He was writing the book Them about like a whole like smattering. It was like a Whitman sampler of a bunch of different things. So he had a reason to talk to Alex Jones because Alex Jones was one of them, just like he was interested in Bohemian Grove as one of them. But he got to see see like these two different chemicals react in a weird way where maybe, I don't know, like this was him discovering penicillin in my way.
Well, the world was so different at the time, right? Like there wasn't as big by any stretch of the imagination of an online community where you could talk about these ideas, these sort of, I mean, conspiracy theories and internet hadn't quite pollinated each other yet, right? So there's a lot of people were getting their information from books or movies and TV. And if the TV wasn't talking about this, then you weren't hearing about it on the internet yet. And this was that transitionary period of 1997, 1998, 1999. Boom. All of a sudden, you could find these weird Angel Fire pages that talked about Bohemian Grove, but it was really new still. So
July 16th, if you acknowledge that the cremation of Kara ceremony extended beyond midnight, I just want to lay out the bullet points here. So you have JFK Jr. dies the day and year of the release of Eyes Wide Shut. Okay. Year to that day, you have into past midnight, you have the infiltration of Bohemian Grove by John Ronson, who has this connection to Kubrick through Kubrick's boxes 10 years later in 2010. And so, so it was a year to the day of the release of Eyes Wide Shut, which is July 16th, which is also the day of the Apollo 11 launch. Right. So, which was also interesting enough, when it was on television, it was accompanied by Space Oddity by David Bowie, which recalls David Bowman. But yeah, when they aired it, they actually, which is so crazy because it's a song about heroin. So like it had come out like around the same time, I think. I'd have to check the specifics. But yeah, when they aired the Apollo 11 launch, I guess on at least one of the stations or something, I'd have to do grok on that. But yeah, Space Oddity, Apollo 11 does have that connection. But anyway, where did it take off from? From Cape Kennedy. Just wanted to and then also, yeah, there's the whole Apollo symbolism of the sun god and all that stuff. Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up too for whatever, the Sun Lady Unveiled, because one of the books we talked about earlier, right? I forget which one that we were, I think it was the Baphomet one or one of the Tracy books. I think, yeah, Baphomet. The Baphomet book that Tracy wrote, she had a lot of help, at least from Alexander Rivera, and Alexander Rivera has done some interesting work as well. And the one that I would recommend is the Sun Lady Unveiled, right? And this talks a lot about sort of the femininity, I mean, stepping on the snakes, this idea that the mystery schools are kind of hiding the goddess in plain sight, and that, you know, it's one of the nice things about being Catholic. You're like, oh, well, we still have that. It's like when they like, do we need goddess worship? We have that at home. You know, we still have it all set up. You just have to know what it is.
Yeah, occultism. What you mean? The thing that's been drilled into my brain since I was a baby? Yeah, like that's not out of the ordinary.
It's good to be Catholic. So, David, where does Sparrow's Nose find Sorry, Cassandra, I Misunderstood? She's been meaning to check it out. Where can she watch this?
A few places online. Somebody uploaded it to the archives, internet archives, but it's on the Sync Book website. If you go to my page of Sync Films, it's close to the very bottom. So
go to the syncbook.com and you go to videos right here, and from videos,
or just scroll down. Either way, as long as you get to Dorothy with the Dark Side of the Moon. So yeah,
click on this picture right here, David.
Yeah. Also, actually, if you don't even have to click on that, just scroll down. Or actually, go back. Yeah, just easier than that. Yeah, there it is.
Right there. It's on the front page. You go to purple. Sorry, Cassandra, I Misunderstood. Everything Predicts 9/11. It's right there. By the way, Sparrow, it is like a long doc. It's like a binge. Just so you know, it's not like an hour or like a half hour. It's like 7 hours. So it's a whole series in an episode, you know.
It's 7.5 hours long. It was intended to be the length of an acid trip so that you can actually make a trip out of it.
Have you ever considered making a version that was 9 hours and 11 minutes long?
Yeah, but this is what I mean. I'm still open to doing that. I'm still like, there's things I wanted to build on Sorry, Cassandra, and like continue on, because it feels like it could just, not even just adding in terms of time, but like even in layers. Like I'm just like, I will want to like take it in sections and do a whole thing with it. But yeah,
so. It's an incredible thing. So I highly recommend everyone see it if you haven't seen it. And, you know, I mean, you spend a lot of time watching a TV series. You might have like 10 to 20 episodes of a Netflix show. You just saw more than you would have had to see in order to watch Sorry, Cassandra. Sorry, Cassandra's, I would say, kind of like, you could make this into a single binge really easily without acid. So do it, but also you can watch it.
Just to be clear, like kind of the point of Sorry Cassandra is looking into the specific like underlying dynamics of 9/11 and seeing like focusing on specific places where the same dynamics show up. But I do a thing where I kind of like leave it to the viewer to like not. I don't have like narration, so like there's connections that will come like in the final like 3 hours of the film that actually tie back to things from the beginning. So if you watch the whole thing in one sitting, you're more likely to like make those connections and see what I'm doing, because I did a thing where I like I was like, well, what happens if I just assume the most intelligence that I can of the audience, so like without spelling everything out, like if there were, it's just like, it's so like, yeah, I assume the best of the audience in terms of their critical thinking and connection drawing. So there's like things that will connect to other things that aren't explicitly stated. They actually speak for themselves. It's all kind of inspired by this Kubrick quote where he describes the way that the least enjoyable and least effective way of communicating something is directly. If you can get people to the point where they get the insight themselves, then that the thrill of discovery cuts right through to the heart. So that's what I was going for. But yeah.
So, David Bowie's Space Odyssey, released July 11th, 1969, was rush released to coincide with the Apollo 11 moon landing, July 16th, 1969, the 16th to 20th. The BBC used it as background music during its TV coverage of the moon landing. So it was essentially rushed to be finished for the moon landing, so they could use. It's like, what else is the reason they're trying to use it? Despite its dark lyrics about an astronaut, Major Tom, stranded in space, Bowie noted, I'm sure they really weren't listening to the lyrics at all.
Right. But the lyrics relate to 2001: A Space Odyssey, especially like even Frank Poole, like I guess he died, but it's like the David Bowman's going through the Stargate thing. Like that's very relatable to it. It also, I find it really interesting that the song Space Oddity happens to be the exact same length from the fade out that exists in the middle of Pink Floyd Echoes to the fade in. So when they have that whale song sequence in Echoes, that Echoes is 23 minutes and 26 seconds long, which is the exact same length from in 2001 when they say its origin and purpose still a total mystery, and it says Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite. So where the title Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite comes out on the screen to written and directed by Stanley Kubrick, that's exactly 23 minutes and 26 seconds long. And it just so happens that Space Oddity is the exact same length as the whale sequence. So you can take Pink Floyd Echoes and just throw in on the fade out the fade in of Space Oddity, and it'll perfectly, like, you can leave the volume up for Pink Floyd Echoes and it just flows. Like it's just the two work together. It's like an early like DJ kind of like
good job, British Satanic Occult Music Studios, for sure. Yeah. So Sun Lady Unveiled, I just wanted to say, like, so Alexander Rivera's book, and it's about the woman clothed with the sun from Revelation 12. So interpreting her as a symbol of primordial wisdom and a key to humanity's hidden past and destiny. And the book traces her archetypes through ancient Israel, Samaria, Egypt, Rome, Greece, Babylon, and occult traditions, blending Gnosticism, mythology, and biblical exegesis. Due to the limited access of this book, there's not like a huge breakdown chapter by chapter, so I don't know if you could like get away with that with Grok necessarily, but you could definitely. I think the book is like available for, I don't know, I guess it's $9 on Kindle. I think you can find it on Archive as well.
You've read this book, Andreas?
Yeah, I've only read part of it though, but yeah. So I mean, I highly recommend it just because it's, if you like Tracy's work, then here's a guy who worked with Tracy who, some of her more famous material, the Baphomet book.
Is this drawing upon Blavatsky? I mean, the title reminds one of Isis Unveiled, which was Blavatsky's first book.
So like a bit, but I would say it's really deeply into the like Sumerian Jewish biblical, like it's about Revelation and the idea of what we're hiding, so in a sense, Blavatsky does talk about how there's different groups that have been holding on to the secret, and the Theosophical Society is, the great protectors of that secret. But this is more like everyone kind of knows these things, and if you just put them together, you realize that they're all the same character, and it just goes back to Ishtar.
There's that I guess it's an etching or whatever that Manly P. Hall relates to, of the where it says it's Isis, and she's standing there with the serpent at her feet, which is a biblical reference, right? But it says above her, "No man hath me unveiled," and then it says the fruit which I have brought forth is the sun. So I assume that's where the title comes from, right? Is that famous occult etching? But yeah, or whatever.
I mean, there is it is from Revelation 12, just the idea that
right, the woman clothed with the sun with the moon at her feet. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and so I mean that plays into a lot of traditions, but the idea of the red dragon and the beast and this sort of St. Michael's dragon, right? Like the cosmic war versus the cosmic dragon. And Gnosticism, because you get in Gnosticism this idea of Sophia, but it's like Sophia and Eris, right? This is like woman's wisdom, which can be insane and all powerful and all profound at the same time. So it's both chaos and order.
That today, earlier, the Psyche and Eros, as they appear, there's a place in Eyes Wide Shut that I knew the statue from where the two guys that show up again at the end and follow Helena around the corner, and it's the last we see of their daughter. But there's also apparently people are speculating it's a Psyche and Eros statue that is in the mansion later on in the background, I think while they're dancing to Strangers in the Night. But point is like, in psychology, the way that they relate to Psyche and Eros, you can look at James Hillman's works on it. Like, it's a very significant meaningful communication, and it's appropriate that it would be an Eyes Wide Shut as it is.
So what do you think about the Psyche and eroticism? Like, what do you think of Psyche and Eros?
Well,
is that
also
sort of a metaphor
to intellect and emotion, like, so like, we would see one as greater than the other depending on who our biases or whatever, but they're kind of like, I think kind of the point is that they're ultimately equal, right, in their own ways. Like, you don't want to make decisions based on emotion, but you also don't want to just make decisions based on intellect. Like, that's kind of the issue with AI, is that it's supposed to be all intellect. So like, Data from Star Trek, like, he needs to be around those humans to like keep things, like, if the whole mission was just left to Data, it'd probably become problematic, right? Which is kind of what the point of 2001: A Space Odyssey is that everything was put into this, to Hal, that he's going to lead the way, when really it's like, whoa, like, you're great and you're super helpful, but you cross a line if we rely on you too much, which I think is kind of the point of. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, I was going to say, Data does get kind of proclaimed as human in one of the episodes. It actually comes up into like a court case, I believe, and the whole crux of that is whether or not, oh man, Andreas probably knows more of this, but like they're either going to kill him or they're not going to let him like leave or something, or he has to
They're deciding whether or not he's a person.
Order.
So it's like season 1, I don't remember if it's like episode 8 or something, but it's like the one where the former girlfriend of Patrick Stewart, Captain Picard, is a judge now, and there's this young scientist who wants to dismantle Data so he can put him back together again, but in the process learn what makes him tick, and then they can make an entire army of these workers, and then they start to have this court trial about whether or not they're property of the Federation, or whether this is a person, and the difference between personhood and what defines a person. And Riker has to prove that this is a machine, even though it's his best friend, basically, and he shows like, I can turn him off, and turn him back on, and then Picard's like, this is not that different than me. I mean, you can turn off a human, like, that's kind of a brutal thing to turn off a person. That's kind of the point here. And that they have the ability to, start showing Data's love of, he's got like a sexual relationship with this lesbian military commander chief lady, right, who's using him as a coin operated Dresden doll, and he's into it. And so all these different, his dreams, his aspirations, that he's got realizations of his goals, he's got pride in his accomplishment. It's basically what I think everyone who doesn't get AI is a person needs to see this Data episode.
Okay. I can't remember if it was here or elsewhere, but were we talking about the Final Frontier not that long ago? Did we discuss Final Frontier 5 Star Trek, where there's the guru type guy who's like the grifter, and he's like, but it's just like Scientology, because they're doing real self work, but then he uses them after the fact. He uses it to manipulate them.
Yeah.
The breakthrough is genuine, but then he's like manipulating them that he's going to bring them to the New Jerusalem or heaven or whatever it is. Like I
found Thummim kind of thing going on with his chest plate there.
The best scene like of any Star Trek movie for me is in this movie, like where Shatner is freaking out, and he's just like saying about his fear. He's like, but I need my fear. He's like, our fear is what makes us who we are. Who would I be without my fear? Like, it's just like, it's so, because it's like well, that is what Scientology does. They'll have these real exercises where people have breakthroughs, and then they get taken advantage of because now they're going to attribute their breakthrough to L. Ron Hubbard. You know, it's just like the same thing that organized religion has done all through time, where it's like people will have a genuine experience. It's like a spiritual experience, but then they still get taken advantage of because they feel empowered by it, but then they're also vulnerable because they're so receptive. You know, you get into a receptive state. It's kind of the paradox. But yeah,
I've been watching My Name is Earl, and it's funny trying to find like Scientology TV because I grew up thinking like, oh man, Scientologists, it wasn't the Jews, it was Scientologists, right? That was the way in the 90s. You just assumed everything was run by Scientologists, and it was kind of true, but not completely, because clearly a lot of people were in the 90s really weird about Scientologists, and were kind of didn't want to work with them just about as much as Scientologists didn't want to be around SPs. But you can see in certain shows like NCIS, or in certain kinds of detective shows, these like very clearly there's this emotional Draco Gray that's using you to feel, and it's just this is the process of this show that there's an auditing session.
Goats, right? Like the Scientology is, I'm kind of to think of it in a weird way, is like is the CIA of the OTO. Like they are the literal guys staring at notes without like the emotion, and like they're trying to be Data in a way, right? And just before we move on to Data, there's something really sick about the premise of that episode where Data ultimately, they all decide that he is, he has these rights and that we're not going to disassemble him. And then like, now step into this transporter. Like what? Right. Is the transporter doing the exact thing to every single person on the ship that we just determined through a whole course of an episode that like we shouldn't do to Data?
I really wish that they would have pushed that more. That's the thing that's beautiful about Next Generation, is that every Star Trek has the zeitgeist of the problems of its time without really thinking about them. So you look at like the 70s and the 80s, or in the 60s is hypersexualized and misogynistic. The 70s is racist. I mean, this Klingon thing is this weird kind of Eurocentric look at progressivism. The 80s, they're fatigued and exhausted, but there's clearly a cult Scientology and an environmentalism. God, I mean, who doesn't love the orca and space thing? But eventually Star Trek gets to a point where, I mean, by Next Generation in the 80s, you're looking at the American addiction to Hot Pockets, you know, and like non-dairy creamer. I mean, that's the space that Next Generation really has.
Roddenberry, the guy?
Gene Roddenberry. Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry. There's the argument that there's a MK Ultra connection that he didn't necessarily have to ultimately do knowingly, but there's an argument that the different planets and who inhabits those planets was used as a map
sure.
in the CIA for alters, so that they would and they cover those with trauma. So if they wanted to basically keep track of people's different alters, they would use the Star Trek universe in order to basically maintain the complexity.
I mean, just saying captain's log and psyching some numbers at somebody is already pretty weird. But yeah, saying that they're from this weird world, you know, that was a thing for sure. And
right. He just recently got pissed off. You hear about that? Shatner, that they it was on some of the streaming networks or whatever of the release of Star Trek, they changed the intro specifics of what said to boldly go where no man has gone before, and they changed it to where no one has gone before. I think is what it was.
They changed him,
and he got pissed off. Yeah, and he was like, "You guys are
him saying it." That's ridiculous.
They turn the guns into walkie-talkies? What are you talking about? That destroys the whole portion of that scene.
I mean, it also like takes away from the difference between Next Generation, because the Next Generation is where they say no one has gone before. Picard's thing saying that differentiate. I mean, because Next Generation, you've got dudes in skirts. Like, you ever notice that with the Star Trek?
There's also several Mandela effects that he never said "Beam me up, Scotty," even though Tupac went ahead and had the lyric of "Beam me up, Scotty, I control your body. I'm as deadly as AIDS when it's time to rock the party." Like, that was never said in the show, apparently. Surprisingly, I guess they did say "Beam me up," but never said. There's not an instance where you can find where they actually said "Beam me up, Scotty."
Dude, I love the amount. I love the amount of these little outfits that they had. And if you watch the original Next Generation, there were just straight up dudes in skirts all the time. But it was
this looks like a UPS outfit, like a modern day UPS.
Like the not wearing pants makes it kind of like, I get why Picard put on like a little. He's got some pants when he wears it, because otherwise it just sticks out. If you don't have tights on, it's kind of crazy. But there's definitely there's something really different about Star Trek. God, look at this guy. Oh my God. Like, I mean, what do they think about the 24th century that we were all going to be wearing these like skirts and running around? I don't know.
Are we not? Is that not happening?
It's gonna be the way. I mean, you gotta have some room down there so you can run.
Aren't Jinkos just a skirt with an extra seam down the middle?
It's like a super long jink. Yeah, I agree with you there. But there's something about Star Trek in the 80s that reflects our own addiction to, like I said, Hot Pockets and microwavable food and the replicator and everything. It's like everything's at that point where people are relying on it. And by the end of Next Generation, into the 90s, like Riker is all of a sudden, like by the Deep Space Nine and Voyager, you've got cooks growing vegetables in space for the novelty of having organic food that's not just replicated.
There's a balance there though too, because then they introduce the Omega Directive, which lets you know, by the way, everything that we've ever told you might be based on a lie, and in fact it needs to be based on a lie
for your own safety. Yeah,
because that was a 90s thing, right? Wasn't Omega Directive something established in the 90s, early 2000s?
In Star Trek or in real life?
In Star Trek.
I thought.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the with the Omega Project or whatever. Wasn't it? There's like an Omega University or something that was started by, what's his name, who wrote "Be Here Now"?
Ram Dass.
In New York, Ram Dass started some occult university called Omega. Yeah, unrelated. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, that's cool. I mean, I'm just looking into that too. Yeah, to me, it's interesting. The Omega. The Omega molecule.
The Omega Directive, my understanding, and to put it in the context we were just talking about, you were saying that like Psyches and Eros, right? And like part of me is like, who's gonna win, right? That's the whole thing. Is it's sort of the love pair up in the sick. This is Jim and Pam in The Office. They're not allowed to get together because it needs to be this like balance, this Ouroboros in a way. And the Omega Directive, I understood, is almost like giving Psyche. Letting Psyche win. The Omega Directive is that the Borg can't get a hold of this like hypercube thing, because then the Borg win. It's just an instant 100% win, and then Eros never gets to recover from this thing. So that the Omega Directive is to destroy this cube, even if it can solve every other problem, because Psyche might get a hold of it, and if Psyche gets a hold of it, everything else dies.
Right. We can't. So yeah, we shouted out who killed the Kennedys, when after all it was you and me. Laura Palmer, her killers can never be found because it's us, right? So like it's like you can't. The observer is the observed, so like you can't like go
the dam.
Forward, it's like the source is always before. Paragot. Yeah. Anyway.
Mythoclass says, my thought about D being 007 is that he was sent out across the world with the Queen's blessing to do her bidding. Like some Game of Thrones stuff, he was given access to the best tech from Q. You think
the scrawling, whatever you call that, the obsidian thing or something? I don't know.
Q is the character that's multidimensional, that's friends with Picard, and he's curious about the fate of humanity, right?
I forgot. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't making the connection. Cool. I thought he was talking about like,
like the MAGA Q, Krav Maga Q. Yeah.
or the feathered serpent. I don't know.
You never know. Could have been.
It's the Quaddle. Yeah, I don't know. All right. Which is a Star Trek episode, by the way, from the cartoons. It's my favorite.
I wanted to bring up the Star Trek cartoon because a lot of mind control in that, particularly, like a lot of that is the hypnosis psyop. Yeah,
that is not your average cartoon right there.
Also, Q in the James Bond sense too, because Q was and like Q, this is a weird connection, but Q and James Bond, talking about John D and James Bond being Q in Star Trek, but Q and James Bond was the Stanley P. Lavelle in the CIA, again, of MK Ultra. Like, he was the guy, and it's the same relationship between, like, shout out Mythoclast, this dynamic between John D and the Queen. It's almost like Eros and Psyche in a way, because like John D needs the Queen because the Queen has resources, and the Queen needs John D because John D has resources, and they are at these opposite ends of the spectrum. It's the same weird phenomenon that I haven't come up with a name yet, but it's like, why do we have AI? And someone else in the comments said, oh, Obama used Plantier AI and like ran it before we. Well, that's because the government takes technology as far as they can, and then they have to pass it off to the non-government and just be like, we've hit the limitation. It can't go any farther. So here you go. Here's this thing that we've been using since forever. We can't figure out how to improve upon it. And then the normies, they improve upon it. The rubes, they improve upon it somehow. And then the government's like, oh my God, the potato, let's grab that potato back away from you now that the heat's died off. And we're going to like keep building on this and pass it back and forth. And it felt like that was the relationship between John D and the Queen, the relationship between Q and Star Trek, the relationship between Q and Stanley P. Lavelle and the CIA, like passing this thing back and forth, like, ooh, it's too hot for me, and I throw it to you, and you're like, oh, I can work with this. I know how to dissipate this. Oh, now it's gone cold. I don't know what to do with this. Here, you take it, and it just goes back forever.
Can I tie this back to Sharon Tate in a crazy way? So Ian Fleming's top choice for who should play James Bond was David Niven. And David Niven starred in Sharon Tate's very first movie, Eye of the Devil, alternatively titled 13, about the Golden Bough. So David Niven's character, even like in this movie, is so similar to the character in Casino Royale, which is the comedy about James Bond, starring Peter Sellers, right? So in that comedy, Peter Sellers is supposed to be a Hollywood James Bond who meets the real James Bond in that movie, played by David Niven, who was Ian Fleming's top choice in reality, and it's the only time he ever played 007. And what's crazy is, like, if you watch his part in Casino Royale and then you watch Sharon Tate's first film, Eye of the Devil, the castle, his part, like everything just like totally like resonates to like a ridiculous degree. Like, then this is about the ritualistic killing of the king. So like this ties in with Manchurian Candidate and even Day of the Dolphin and Through the Golden Bough. Like, this is the most Golden Bough movie that I know of, even more so in certain ways than Wicker Man. Like, and this is very relatable to Wicker Man, obviously, but yeah, that's nuts. Like, her first movie, let's just to be clear, like, this relates to the High Priestess, like, because her first movie is titled 13, like you see in this poster. Her last movie was 13 Chairs, which was alternatively titled 12+1. If you watch the Eye of the Devil, aka 13, it's relating that the dynamic of the 12 disciples to Jesus was something that had pagan roots, where they would ritualistically kill their king. Yeah, so see, there's 12+1. So these bookend her whole career. This is her very last movie. Sometimes people would say Breaking the Waves, or what? Not Breaking the Waves, something else. What's similar? I forget what the title of it was. It's the one in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. People assume that was her last movie, but they jump forward a year in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood from that point when she goes to the theater. So, but anyway, yeah, this is her last film. Actually, Orson Welles shows up and says he's Jack the Ripper and has like a Sweeney Todd blade or whatever. It's super weird. But yeah, anyway, you get the idea.
Dude, crazy.
Yeah.
Sharon Tate. Well, okay, so let me just pop up over to the links here for a second, and just in case anyone was interested in some of the things that we talked about for Sean, I reposted to my wall. You can check out David's sync flick. This one was, which one was this one again?
It's called Full Circle, or the Haunting of Julia. It's kind of similar to what I was just saying, where you have these alternative titles and it's released both ways, you know?
Yeah, highly recommend. And then also there was Tracy Twyman's Hard to Find Videos, Secret of Minnie Mouse Part
So
1.
this
And
is a
I
little
think Part 2
misleading.
is here too. Yeah.
Right. So this isn't actually like, so in this thread, it's hidden somewhere in this thread is the full video. That's also on BitChute, I think. But somewhere, like if you go to the replies, there's a place where, is it even here? Yeah, somebody removed a post. That's not it.
Deleted.
That's not the post that's deleted. It is somewhere in here though. I'll reshare it to your wall or something. I'll send it to you. But in this, there's like the full video. And actually, like I say in the tweet, I go, I'm actually full of shit. This actually exists online in its entirety, because I said I used to be hard to find, and now it is available in its completeness. And so like even these two parts aren't even the full thing. So I'll show it to you. Yeah.
Epic. Okay, so everyone can check that out, and we'll put a link there to the rest of the series, but you can at least see part 1 and part 2. They're like a half hour each, so that's a start. And then, oh, hey, are you guys following Xirtus Amoeba, my favorite channel? These are like the Xirtus clips, and Jose's doing them, and they're freaking great. And we just had this one from Synctank last week talking about rock and rule. So if you're interested in little 2-minute snippets of Synctank that you want to be able to share with your friends, or you want to memorize some specific thing we talked about,
dip a toe in the Synctank. You don't want to get all the way in.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Get up in there. So, okay, that's cool. Now, Paranoid American over here, we're gonna go him for a second. Actually, no, wait, David Plate. We didn't quite fully say that. Go to MK Ultrasound 723 so you can watch the sync flicks. The Black Stallion paired with Way's Blood's album And in the Darkness. Wise Blood. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a square when it comes to, hip hop. What do I know? Just kidding. All right. So then you go to the syncbook.com. From the syncbook, you saw earlier how to get to Sorry Cassandra, but you just click on videos up at the top here, and that's how you get to the sync flicks. You can also check out Sync Quick News, some of the classic stuff from Abadasa, from our buddy. Cool. All right.
Good job.
So,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then so paranoidamerican.com for the best comic books in the world. Right now you can get the reusable sticker book. There's probably like 3 left, so hurry up on that before they're gone. And then make sure you buy yourself the conspiracy cards pack. It's only $5, and they're super incredible. Bill Hicks as a baseball card or a conspiracy card, trading card sets with Rick Ross. I mean, Timothy McVeigh. Don't miss out.
And there's a lot more of these now too. We got a Synctank card. I mean, I think next week we'll be able to show a little preview of what David and I have been working on for the last all of us have been working on for the last couple of years now, right? This Golden Bough thing. The website's going to be kubrickcomic.com, although I don't think it goes anywhere yet, but I own it. Like I've got the domain.
I can't believe you got that.
Oh, there it goes. It's signed. So if you go there, you can sign up, and then you'll get an announcement of when we show some of this off. And I'm hoping that next week, on Tuesday, regularly scheduled Synctank, we'll show a preview of a Golden Bough / Kubrick comic that David and I have been working on. We'll hash out some of the ideas. It's I love your description of assume the highest intelligence of the audience, because I guess sometimes I do the opposite, and I sort of like beat people over the head. But I also feel like in the way that I was shaped by Chick Tracks, or I had to have things beat over my head too. It's like, oh, there might be an idiot out there that's as dumb as I am, and I need to cater to the idiot in me, right? And because it's in you too somewhere. But there's going to be like a weird meeting between these two sort of extremes where we figure out how to instruct you everything you've ever needed to know about Kubrick and everything you need to know about Fraser and the Golden Bough in the span of like a short little comic book. I don't know how the hell it's going to work, but we're going to force it sort of like the square peg through the round hole together.
That's awesome.
That does sound like a lot of fun. So everybody, make sure you check out paranoidamerican.com. Go to Tartary Nova, Xirtus, follow us, like us, subscribe, share with your friends. It really helps the algorithm. All right, we'll see you next time. Thank you for being here.